Hey there, everyone. I'm Carson Grubaugh,
I'm Sean Robinson.
and we're both from Living the Line. We're coming out with the book, The Strange Death of Alex Raymond. We'll show that a little bit of that at the end of this video. But today we're going to be talking about, Sean, can you pronounce the name?
Yes, this is a new release by Drawn and Quarterly. Drawn and Quarterly, that's what you wanted me to help pronounce, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
Drawn and Quarterly. It's
uh,
definitely the hard part.
by Shigeru Mizuki. And this is a recent release, and this is one of the last, as far as I know, one of the last books that he worked on. It's called Tono Monogatari, or
Yeah,
Gatari. And
are you sure that's the right way to pronounce the name?
absolutely not, and we're going to say lots of things in horrendous ways through the video, through pure ignorance. So please forgive us. Um, and to, Mr. Mizuki is a fascinating cartoonist and has, I mean, decades and decades worth of work under his belt. And he passed away a few years ago. He was in his 80s, so maybe not the tragedy that you know you might think of it as, but he's fortunately in the past 10 years has had his work slowly released by Drawn and Quarterly, and really it's a service to the broader comics community. In my estimation, I've been waiting for his stuff for forever, since Mr. Fred Schott, the original manga enthusiast in the United States, turned me on to Mr. Mizuki in Fred Schott's overview of the manga industry called Manga Manga, which came out in 1985. Manga Manga, the world of Japanese comics, had a page and a half or so devoted to Shigeru Mizuki, which talked about a bunch of his comics. And today we're going to talk about this particular one, which is a handsomely designed volume.
Yes, I mean, starting right out the gate, like when we talked about this originally, we were both oohing and awing over the two-color print on the cover with the red ink showing through. So yeah, that's just I think a beautiful look on the cover. And this is the image they've got here is one of the probably the most impressive iconic images. We'll take a closer look at that when we start zooming in on stuff. But that big rock there, and
I
I
believe
think that gets right to the guts of what I find interesting about this book. Um, so, Sean, I'm
visually or
just
thematically.
visually.
Yeah.
Thematically, I think we both agreed that this book was pretty, I hate to say it, but unreadable for me.
Yeah.
It's worth getting for the art, absolutely. It's a beautifully produced book, but just to give a sense of what the book is, it's basically, and I think it's a worthwhile project. He's going and collecting the local tales of uh,
Yeah.
Tono, I guess, is the city that he's in. Yeah, here's the present day map of Tono. So it seems to me like
Yeah.
if we get to page one here, chapter one, this color page, that must be a caricature of Mizuki himself.
That's right. He
And
it
he's, go
This
ahead.
is a classic novel. This is an adaptation of a classic Japanese novel that's about a century old at this point. That was the original author's collection and embellishments of the local folk tales of this area, and follows all the different ghosts that lived in the area and ghost stories that people had and things like that. So Mizuki has drawn an adaptation of that, just basically taking the parts that he wants to draw, and has made it as episodic as the original novel, and he's inserted himself as the narrator into the adaptation of the novel.
And you'll see how episodic this is, which is why I found it unreadable eventually. And there's one in particular I'll show you where I tapped out, but it just like number one, and it will be 8 panels or something, and then number two is just one panel.
Sure.
And then number three, and it's just like that. And a lot of the tales are just very short. It's hard to get wrapped up in any of the emotional content of any of that.
Right.
And I think it's a worthwhile cultural preservation project. I think that's what he's up to at this point in his old age, probably, I would assume. Um, but for someone who's outside of that culture, who's not anthropologist or
Yeah.
something. I was like, I'm just gonna look at the art. There's nothing grabbing me here. So I think this will be a pretty brief episode where we just pick out some pages that we really like. I don't know if you have any tag that you wanted to look at.
No, I'm happy to follow along with your tags there. The other thing I wanted to add is this was actually serialized in, I think it was like 8-page bursts in a monthly comic. So this collection is not necessarily even the way it was, originally intended to read, in the sense that it would have been broken up by other continuing stories in the original serialization. And this was drawn in 2010, which was the 100th anniversary of the original novel, Tono Monogatari, being written. And some of them he apparently, according to the translator Zach Davison, some of them he's fairly faithful to the original, and other ones he's basically inserting his own type of humor into the original situation. But as the intro points out, that's actually fairly consistent with the original book, in that the original writer did not necessarily literally record each of these things, but rather sort of embellished things as he was going, or connected things together that weren't necessarily connected in his original notes for it. But let's take a look.
Maybe it'd be more interesting to read it just like one a day. Maybe I should go back and do that.
Yeah.
You appreciate the art more when you read it, but I just flipped through. So the first one I had tagged is page 21. It's the first, so I assume the second 8-page chapter. The reason I tagged that one is I think this is really representative of what I've gleaned about his style. And it's great. It's something we'll talk about more when we do a recreation, because he has this, what I call painterly, which is very like fluid line work, and then a lot of drawing, where it's this insanely like high level of accuracy, kind of finicking over things. But I thought that this page here not only is a representative of what his style is, but I think his influence from Osamu Tezuka shows up, who does the same thing. And Scott McCloud talks about that in Understanding Comics, putting these cartoony characters in the realistic situation, embedding the reader in it. And when we go to looking at them on the computer, we'll look at some of the lineage of that. So page 21, I think, to me, these are images like this background with the mountains here. Like I've seen those in the Tezuka Buddha and stuff. So that to me was very clear, but also like just beautiful character. Some of the looser manga art that I've seen, the characters.
We've talked about a couple different videos, but this is sort of also a good example of a really, really practical division between quote unquote author and assistant, and that he could have a house style that he could train people on, and people who are working with him could be relegated to the backgrounds. He can have this extremely loose, extremely fluid style to use for all the characters, and then have essentially assistants come in and fill in all of this labored work and not
slave away on the cross hatching.
Right.
You burn out your wrist, I'm gonna be calligraphic.
And it's shocking how consistent it is over a 30 or 40 year period. If when we get a chance to look back at like Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths, or if you look at some of the other drawn and quarterly releases like Non Non Ba, or the Kitaro books, and it really is he had like a house style that persisted for many decades. And you'll notice that most of the stuff is credited to Mizuki Pro or Mizuki Productions.
Which is the studio.
Yeah. Right. And that was his studio. And, I don't know a lot about the inner workings of the studio, but one of the books that we've already talked about a couple of videos back, another Drawn and Quarterly release was drawn by somebody who started out as Mizuki's assistant, or not necessarily started out as, but worked for Mizuki's assistant.
I have that pulled up too, because there's a page that seems really similar to me, a composition with the Suge book. On page 29 here, this is another one of those just gorgeous backgrounds, all of these vines hanging off of the hut there and the figure. So yeah, there's some poor, and this he really is the perfect example between like someone who draws more like a painter, like really uses a brush, and then whoever's in the background draws like someone who's doing what I call drawing.
Right.
So I mean, but that's a beautiful image, and I can't wait to read his other work because I want to like this book so bad. The art's so good, but the episodic nature. Okay, page 39 is where I bailed out. So this is a great example of story number 9. He's an old man now, but when I'm gonna
Kikuchi, yeah.
Kikuchi was young, he led pack horses over Sakaigi Toji, and he made his way through the pass and he played his flute. So it's a big mountain. A guy's playing his flute. One day, as they traversed through the valley, someone yells, "You're good!" And what was that voice? They all freak out, run for it. They run, and then he's like, that's the sound of the yokai called Uwan. It gets a kick out of startling people. And like that's the story. So it's like they went on a walk, someone shouted at them, they got scared. And I went, I don't know, man. Like I can't be too interested in these stories.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, like, because it's commenting on a common text that you and I don't have any kind of grounding or appreciation or knowledge of. So, I mean, it almost feels like if somebody were to like, make a comic continually referencing the Mary Tyler Moore Show or something.
Yeah.
If you've seen the Mary Tyler Moore Show, that might be the most engaging thing that you've read that week or whatever. Just to throw out an American reference that's just as weighty, right?
But I don't want to denigrate the anthropological worth of preserving the local history of a place. I think that's totally worth it. I just don't think, for me particularly, it's a compelling read. And I think you were pretty much there with me on that.
Oh yeah, we were talking about if you had to distill the first 100 pages of this, it might end up with somebody coming out of the woods in a bear costume, eating everyone, dismembering the horses, and then you'd hear a story about a flute.
Yeah. The next one I have tagged is page 52. For as much work as goes into the backgrounds, and I don't know if his assistants were doing this stuff or not, but I was really captured by the very careful contour rendering of the woman in the upper left with her cloak. Yeah. They didn't just slap on a lot of them, they pop on a screen tone with some pattern. And there's one of those I want to look at really closely because it's like, it's really beautiful. I'm assuming it's a screen tone, really beautiful screen tones. But this isn't a screen tone. That's very carefully hand drawn. Exactly. That looks photo reference to me. That's how a cloak would bend. And then I also just love, what do they call them? The Okunai Sama. They look kind of like voodoo dolls. I love those. Like, this is very photorealistic art when they're drawing objects. So I thought that page was interesting. Also, this is a good example of, he does a lot of stippling, or someone in his studio is doing stippling on the background effects, and a lot of time on the tongues when characters are yelling. And I really love the sensitivity to texture throughout the book. And that combination of like hatching and stippling and like on the next page here, what is it? It's just the beginning of chapter 7, so page 65. Like the texture of the roof, and again showing his very rubbery characters. And this one has the screen tone that I want to look at, that they've popped over this dress, which is really fine screen tone that has flowers put in it, but then there's like these little bursts around the flowers where it gets darker. That was something when I was looking through, I was like, oh, I want to scan that and look at it close and see what that is. So I thought that was a beautiful page. Another example of these really awesome backgrounds. These remind me of what the Suge was doing a lot.
Right.
This background on that page.
On 66, is that where you're?
Page 65, the one before it.
Right.
It's just chapter 7 intro.
Yeah.
So that's cool. The next one that I had tagged that again just impressed the hell out of me was page 96, and it's more of that stippling. So it's got his rubbery character in there, and then this ridiculously stippled background about a tree falling. And man, that's just a beautiful image. And this is an example of a book, like, we're going to have zero complaints about the production on this, right? Like, this is just, when I look at it, it's like, oh my God. So I thought that page was really impressive. this is another one that I scanned on page 133. There's this woman who's working a loom. It looks like she's got this guy's axe, but she's working the loom. And this is another one of those times where he balanced out all of these textures against this pattern on her dress. And then I really love how that stippling on the dress, it's value wise similar to things around, but she really like stands out and glows in that whole workshop. And then when you flip the page, this is the one I scanned. That can't be a tone pattern on her dress there. It that to me looks very hand done because
Right.
it's wrapping around the dress and stuff. So the amount of time that goes into stuff like that, I found really, I'll just look at this book like so much.
Well, it's got a rich color to the work that is fairly unusual to see in black and white because of how time intensive it can be. I'm saying color because it's like the value and the texture and the line weight, the various line weights that are used are combining to give a sort of patina to each section of the image that is unique to it. So when you look at, are you on 134 still?
Yeah.
So like at the bottom of 134, the person laughing there, each section of that image has its own sort of vibrancy to it and its own sort of patina because each section is made with a different type of line and a different, weight and a different distance and a different sort of implied texture. I mean, it's a really...
Even the woman up top, you have those like thicker hatching lines coming down that make a dark mid-gray, and then the stippling on her dress. But they eventually, like if you squint your eyes, they register as the same value.
Right.
Generally like a mid-gray, but they seem very different on the page. And that's so impressive, like from an ink drawing standpoint. And you're right, coloring is the way to put it. It really livens the image up. And then this story has this character in it that has the flat head. I know that's a typical monster, where you get the water out of his head. But on page 140, this guy comes running out and he's saying, "Boo." And to me, it just looked like Prime Minister Boris Johnson in England or Donald Trump. Like that character I feel like that's a type of character in cartooning we're seeing a lot right now because of certain politicians, and so it just cracked me up, like that little haircut and
it's it's the kappa who lives underneath the bridges or in water or something.
And you're trying to get the water to spill out of his head, right? That's how you shut him off. So I don't know that one. He's even got like on this page with nothing else with screen tone. He's got screen tone for that like shitty fake orange tan. Like, I don't know. I just like that. But I had to mark it down.
And stippled tongue too.
Yeah, that's the stippled tongue. I love the stippled tongue. He does that over and over and over again. And there's something about that I find really pleasing. Then page 163, 162, 163, like that double page spread there. Yeah. That's the perfect example of what you're talking about, like coloring. This feels like a painting with different textures and colors, and all these screen tones are crazy. Like, where are they getting these patterned screen tones? And the mark making on the samurai's armor, this repetitious patterned mark making, and all of that, the hatching and God, that is a beautiful image. Like, buy this book just to wonder at the imagery.
And compelling, all that page is possible because of the thick contour use. I mean, look how thick he goes with the foreground horse and the foreground samurai.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Beautiful composition. This is one where I wish it was a hardcover, where I wish we weren't getting gutter loss. We could lay it flat. Yeah, that's just a beautiful image. So had to put that on camera. And then page 181 is where I saw the relationship to an image that I really liked from the Suge book. when
Right.
you're talking about, I doubt at this point they had not worked together in quite
No.
a while. But there's these images that to me called back that image of the kid walking up the stairs, all the
Right.
leaves being drawn. Yeah, that just really popped out at me. It's like I've seen that before. Okay, let's take a look at some of the art up close then. You see that, Sean?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So this was one where I see that Tezuka influence of like the rubbery characters and then the detailed. And this is a good example of what I'm talking about with the drawing. It's like you can't just make the edge, but you have to get every little like bump and oh, it comes up there for a little bit and then like oh, it dips down there and comes up there and a lot of people would just abstract that out into a pretty
Right.
flat 2 lines, and you get it up here too, like every mark is observed. Maybe that's part of it too, is
Mm-hmm.
there's this observational quality. You're not just coming up with a, oh, I'm going to repeat a general pattern. It's like, no, this one goes this way and then this one goes this way and then it's darker over here. So that's something I keep trying to define on a lot of the videos, and I feel like his work is very helpful in defining what I'm talking about there.
What do you think those kind of skittering marks there, the larger ones that are kind of squared off a little bit? What do you think that this is at the side of the pen?
This?
No, those look just kind of filled in to me. The ones that are describing the darker portions of the roof, there's a few that are a little more squared off. Yeah, right in there.
That's another thing to me that looks drawn, like he went and colored each one of them like that. That's another difference. Like when I'm talking about painting versus drawing, like if you're painting, yeah, you try and do it all in one go and move on. Drawing tends to have more coloring to it, so you would go like this. And so a lot of the times the reason I dislike that is it winds up looking, yeah, more finicky and gummy. It looks gummed up, like there was a crack in the road and someone squoze tar in it.
Right.
In this instance, because of the real careful observation, like I think all of this is really good. This is all really well done. But those, I don't know, those look colored into me. It just looks like someone's going like that. Like they may, they're probably using. Some of it looks like tech pin stuff to me. It's hard to
Yeah.
tell. The stippling definitely has to be. But this is all, the line weight was just one mark. He didn't sit there and go
No.
like this and then color it back in.
Certainly not.
So that's painting. This is drawing where he's sitting. To me, this mark looks like this one right here looks like I do that, and then I do that, and then I do that, and I do more coloring. And then this was, look at this screen tone here.
Yeah. In Japan, there were certain kinds of digital screen tones that were available during a brief kind of crossover period, and I wonder if this might not be a sort of photocopy created screen tone. I don't know much about the actual mechanism of it, but a few of the tones in the book occasionally had a sort of odd look to them. This was done, like I said, in 2010, which is a time in which the physical screen tones would have had less and less availability. And so it's possible they use some kind of, photocopy technique.
And it's reproduced so fine that you don't even really see it as a screen tone in the book.
Right.
It really just reads like this pattern dress, but man, up close even, I found it to be really beautiful the way they had the gradient and the perfect whited out. I don't know. I just really like that.
Yeah, especially in contrast with those big bold lines on top of it.
Yeah, and that's it's beautiful. And that's what you're talking about, coloring. Like
Right.
you're creating a whole like really lively world, and it's not all just abstracted. This was also a good example of what we were seeing, I think both of us seeing as an influence from Tezuka.
Right.
where so many of those backgrounds looked like a Tezuka thing where he's doing that rubbery calligraphic painterly character, and then these really photorealistically or realistically crosshatch rendered, texture rendered images. So I saw like there must have been a huge influence there. And Tezuka famously was a huge fan of Disney. So that solution, because I'm always thinking like, well, where did that solution come from back? And I looked it up, and his favorite Disney, I mean, obviously was into Disney. You have a good story to tell about that. Yeah, go ahead and tell that story.
Yeah, sure. Well, one thing is that yeah, you're totally right about the background usage. When you look at the early Disney features, especially, you know, they felt very limited to this in terms of the characters. Anything that moved had to be painted on a cell, and with the cell painting, you were basically restricted to flat color for anything that was going to move, and that was a pretty tough pill to swallow, but they sort of made up for it by going nuts with the backgrounds.
And like they don't have the line weight changes that you can get in comics because you don't want to track that line weight change of the animation. So even simpler, like just flat. Ooh, that's a terrible contrast on that color. But very simple flat lines. And then the backgrounds are always so rich. So imagining him, Bambi being his favorite movie, Disney being his hugest influence, Tezuka, I assume that solution kind of came from there. And then you see that I mean, it's still happening in manga now. So I like tracking that influence. But you told me before we got going a really good story about Tezuka and Disney.
Yeah, well, so you know, who knows if this is apocryphal or not, but multiple sources have claimed that Tezuka believed that the Dell Disney comics that he was getting through various channels during the war were all literally drawn by Walt Disney because they were signed by Walt Disney. And so his perception is that this guy, Walt Disney, in addition to being a visionary, you know, essentially director of animators, was literally drawing every single comic that came out under his name, and thus must be, you know, the most prolific, productive human being alive on Earth at that point. And so obviously that influenced Tezuka's work ethic, because you know,
gotta catch up.
Right, exactly. And
That's
he was
crazy,
insanely prolific, and you know, of course, used you know, heavily used his studio, but you know, every line on a character is his. He produced an incredible amount of work.
And he died young, right, in his 50s.
He did, and I mean, I'm not surprised by it, frankly. I mean, he didn't sleep enough. You know, he overworked himself, despite having a studio to assist him and you know, put together the backgrounds and things like that. I mean, he just did an insane amount of work.
But the amount that he left behind for such a short career, really,
it's stunning.
Is stunning. Anyways, off topic with that, but well worth talking about. So, you know, I track that, and then I think this is another great example. This is the one we'll be recreating a chunk of, but oh my God, that's all hand done.
Yeah.
And I did some crazy stippling images for You Don't Know Jack and Strange Death of Alex Raymond, so I have a pretty good idea of how wrist destroying and eye numbing this kind of work can be. But man, the look of it is beautiful. And another good example of like really not taking any shortcuts on the observation of it. Like this is so closely observed from some actual thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, that's beautiful. But man, I'm only at like 50% on the scan. Yeah, this is superb reproduction quality. That's the full 1200.
You'll notice if you get a chance to look through the other Drawn and Quarterly publications that were done by Mizuki and Mizuki Pro, his studio. For the most part, they're all sourced what seems to be from the original negatives or the original art. They seem to have kept all of their stuff in very good good condition, and they shepherd it to press. It's interesting with a lot of the American publishers. You're rarely does the American publisher, that they're reliant on the Japanese publisher to supply them with the files in a usable condition, and so you'll see a lot of variation from book to book if you pick up, say, a bunch of Dark Horse manga or something like that.
It's a bummer because when they're given the right access, like, man, can they do a good job. And this is just, I think, a lesson for all artists, especially now that we have scanners. Scan your stuff right and keep it, like, you're going to sell it or whatever.
Yeah.
That's what you're doing with Dave on the Cerebus archive, is he didn't have the capability or didn't think to do that. And now it's a pain to go back and try and get those scans from the original collectors and stuff.
Yeah,
so
everything that I work on, I mean, storage is cheap. Why not? Everything that I work on, I have color scans of the original artwork, as well as the in-process layered files, as well as the actual production files, and all those things get kept. All those things get backed up, and that way, if somebody wants something at a later date, it's already available to them, and you already had to go through all those steps to do it. So why not keep it around?
Yeah, and if he would have had the technology to scan it all when he originally produced it. So that's just going forward. There's no more excuses for artists to not be. So these are the other two that I wanted to just marvel at up close. Not really any critique of the production quality so much as just marveling at the art. I mean, this panel here is printed in the book maybe like 1.5 by 2 inch and a half, 2 inch by 2 inch. And yeah, that's so beautiful to me, the way that they handled her.
The bursts.
Yeah, these flowers on her dress.
Will you go all the way in there?
That's the 100%.
You think that there was some kind of screen tone involved in the center of that burst there, like a layer on top of the standard stippling or something?
They do have that look that you were showing in the other book, where you have two. Let me get my. Some of them do look like those dots where there's two right next to each other, like that. But when you're stippling, that could happen too. It does look pretty programmatic, though. There's like a moire pattern throughout there a little bit. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe they cut out tones. To me, it seems like it'd be easier to just stipple that. I'm not sure, or maybe it is some computer trick where they did a gradient
and then printed it with a noise tone or something.
Well, I think if you make a gradient in the computer, let me get a gradient real quick. I think you can just convert that, right?
Sure.
Like you could just do
to a noise tone using like a
Let me try and get a gradient by hand here. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't just use the gradient tool, but you could get something like that and then just convert to bitmap, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other ways to do it.
And then use diffusion dither as your method.
Oh, okay. Mode, bitmap.
Down to the bottom, yeah.
Diffusion dither.
Or custom pattern. So look at the gradient now up close.
No, that's too pixelated. Oh, I need it at the 1200 dpi. That's what it's doing. That's not quite the look. I think you could also do it this way digitally, like isolate it, mode, bitmap. I think we could do the halftone.
Or a custom pattern.
Yeah, the halftone.
Well, then you're creating it with
Well, that's not the dot. I think there's ways to do that on the computer. So I wonder sometimes on some of the newer manga that I'm seeing that looks like it has those kinds of images where there's a lot of tone that has gradients. Oh, There's some process that they're using, I think, where they're coloring the grays. That looks terrible. Sorry. I think they're coloring the grays like we would in an American comic with all the gradients and stuff,
Right.
and then translating them. Okay, and then this, like, that balloon is, I don't know, it's not very big in the book, and it has this whole city, and that's definitely not any pattern. That is hand stippled. They're stippling like in these lines, like
Right.
they hand drew it all out in lines and then stippled the lines so it wasn't solid.
If you look at the dragon there, that is definitely a photocopy, which is why it's got that quality to the shadow there. You see how you would expect a sharp shadow inside of that cross hatching, but it's a sort of rounded area instead. That's a telltale sign of a multiple generation source. Each level of descending sharpness giving it a softer edge to that interior detail.
Yeah, and compared to those lines,
right,
which are the same mark making, yeah, that was the only image in the book that when at first I was just so like, wow, that looks so cool, and oh my god, look at all the stippling. But when I scanned it, I was like, huh, that looks all gummed up and filled into me, which is weird because it is the only image in the book that looked that way to me.
Yeah, I think it's just
Yeah.
composited with the photocopier.
So they drew that in studio and then photocopied it and
right, shrunk it down, and then I'm not sure exactly what the rationale would be, but yeah, just it was shrunk down from some other sized original or from somewhere else.
Yeah, and you can see that down in these textures as well. But this is another good example of like,
yeah,
he's going in there and coloring. Like you don't get that bump on that mark right there just with the tool. Like you're going in and you're coloring in those
right.
areas. So that's the drawing. This is drawing.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So I don't know.
That's wild.
There's not much to say about the book other than that it's just absolutely beautiful. You should definitely pick it up and wonder over this kind of stuff. Drawn and Quarterly does an amazing job with the reproduction. That alone, should be, I think, celebrated and funded.
When you are taking a look at this book, or if you ever have somebody who complains to you about black and white comics, like why didn't they color it? This is Exhibit A in terms of what you can do with just two colors. I mean, what you can do with just black and just white. I mean, it's a really extraordinary performance.
Yeah, people just don't do it because it takes work.
It does.
And if you want Exhibit B,
it's definitely
you should check out The Strange Death of Alex Raymond hardcover by myself and the legendary Dave Sim. And then Sean was the guy that did all of the digital prepress to make sure that our book prints as well as the Tono Monogatari did.
Right. And yeah, you guys really did some amazing color in that book, and it's interesting. We're comparing these, I mean, just by virtue of talking about this, but the collage aspect of Strange Death, where you're looking at someone else's line work and examining it in minute detail, means that you sometimes have pages where Dave as narrator is drawn in these carefully rendered in these very fine lines, and he's looking at just this giant hunk of black that's probably representing like a single centimeter of an original image, and then you've got all these other things falling away from it, just by virtue of how he composed the pages. It really takes inventive texture to a really interesting place.
Yeah, and composition, like his composition. Anytime I got one of his compositions, it was amazing. And then when I got left to finish it up myself, it was a real pleasure to be that formally inventive with composition as he was. Try and live up to that. So, yeah, check it out. You can get it in your comic book stores. Order it from Diamond. That's the order code there. Or you could get it off Amazon and Target, Walmart. I don't know, soon to be in Victoria's Secret or something.
Right next to the underwear.
Yeah, the good stuff. All right. Thanks, guys. We're going to go now, and we're going to recreate a chunk of this image.
Sounds
Have a good
good.
one, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.